I think gone are the days when people just made the assumption that payroll, you just press a button. Yeah. And I think as the world evolves and it is recognised, not just how important payroll is, but the complexity of payrolls, and with companies operating internationally, but more and more it's recognised how important it is to have an accurate payroll. And yes, not just in terms of paying people, but the external reporting requirements and the internal financial reporting, etc.
Welcome to the Payroll Podcast with your host, Nick Day. Find out what it takes to truly discover what it takes to elevate your career within payroll as we meet with the industry leaders who are shaping the industry for tomorrow.
Welcome back to the Payroll Podcast. My name is Nick Day and I'm CEO at JGA Recruitment Group, Specialist Payroll Recruiters. And today I'm super excited to welcome a friend to the show, someone I've known for over 15 years, a global payroll, employment and expatriate tax expert, Kerry Hudson. Now, Kerry is ATT and ACIPP, and she's now a senior manager in the Central Technical Employer Reward Services team at KPMG. For those not familiar, Kerry is the winner of not one, but two Expatriate Payroll Manager of the Year awards issued by the Global Payroll Association, which she won in both 2017 and 2019. So we're in really, really safe hands today as we really do examine the world of payroll in relation to expatriate tax and global mobility. Now, Kerry has previously worked for absolute industry behemoths, including Deloitte, EY, V Group, Fitzgerald & Law, in roles such as Director of International Payroll, Legislation and Compliance Lead, Global Mobility Tax Manager, and Expatriate Payroll and Executive Compensation AVP. So we are talking today with someone who has a wealth of experience in the world of expatriate tax, global payroll, global mobility, and more. So super excited to jump into some questions and super excited to have you on the show today, Kerry. How are you feeling?
Hi, thanks, Nick, for that introduction. That's amazing. Yeah, feeling good, thank you. I'm very excited to be talking to you and everyone about my experience and my passion, that is global payroll.
Fabulous. Well, super delighted to have you on the show today. I'm going to ask you the first question I ask all my guests, which is this: what does the word payroll mean to you?
I think something for me is for people, pay and privilege. So to be responsible for payroll, you are in a very privileged position, and it's a position of responsibility. And I feel an emotional responsibility to ensure that we pay people correctly, because that is such a massive part of everybody's lives. So the payroll element of any part of my work is always key. So important to help people feel safe, comfortable, and release that stress off their shoulders as we're delivering pay to them each month or whatever their pay cycle might be.
Fabulous.
Long answer, sorry.
No, that's all right. Well, we were talking off air just a moment ago, and I think your first role, back at Hale & Company, where you're working as a tax advisor 20 years ago now, same kind of year that I came into payroll recruitment. So we kind of started this journey together, if you like. But we were talking and you said that nearly all the payrolls you've worked with in your career today have been in-house. Tell us a little bit more about why you think that's given you such a good grounding in the world of payroll.
Yeah, so thanks, Nick. So for me, that has meant that I've had to really understand the configuration of a payroll. So how it's built from literally from each wage type. How does it behave? How is the calculation instructed behind each wage type, how everything hangs together. So in various roles, I've been responsible on the projects that have implemented payrolls and then have looked at a blueprint to actually expand and look at the global payroll piece and like a global data repository and how that might feed in. So I feel for me, it's been that privilege to actually be hands-on, completely in-house. And of course, as we all know, when everything's running fine and smooth, that's great, but it's when the problems kick in, when payroll falls over, that's when I feel that I have really learned the nuts and bolts and the ins and outs of a system, which has kind of really carried me throughout my career.
Super. Now, there are going to be lots of people listening to this. Maybe they work on in-house UK payroll, standalone positions, smaller teams. And there'll be others that have huge teams and huge remits. And the world and the beauty of payroll is its uniqueness and how every payroll is different. But you've worked for some absolutely fantastic companies that we'd see as industry blue chips. You've worked in some great roles in terms of the titles you've had at AVP and director. But people listening go, okay, how do I possibly get from payroll manager and managing a UK payroll at the minute into some of these exciting sounding roles, amazing businesses? What's been your journey that's allowed you to take some of those steps?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I think for me, my career path, because if you look at my CV and look at the moves, I am not industry specific. So I have always looked for opportunities that would grow my knowledge, but give me the opportunity to learn and to help add value and sort of make a difference. And that has definitely been my career path. So I've not been afraid to ask, to approach, to network and explore opportunities. So I think I don't fit in one set category, but that is because of just because I've wanted to learn, I've wanted to make a difference. And I've just had some very fortunate opportunities and I have been able to do that.
What was the first opportunity you got that's moved you into that kind of world of expatriate tax?
So that was, you mentioned 20 years ago, I worked for Hale & Company, Hale & Co. And that's where I studied and gained my tax qualification. And there was a lady that joined that company from Deloitte. And I was chatting away to her and I realised a piece I was missing in my experience was expat tax, but also share schemes when you're looking at that global piece and people moving internationally. So I took the opportunity, applied, and I joined Deloitte at that point, and then moved across to Ernst & Young. So that was really my first defined sort of choice and steps to sort of increase my knowledge. And then after Ernst & Young, I joined Barclays Capital, and I joined them as the expat payroll manager. And that's when I really had to learn. So I had to learn SAP payroll inside out, really learn to be responsible. I was a person signing off, making decisions. And so that was a significant career change for me, and one that I just feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity.
So how was that shift coming from tax and work, your first move into the glorious world of payroll, which we're so passionate about here on the podcast? What is it about payroll that really drew you in, that kept your attention, kept you wanting to yearn for more knowledge in that sector?
Yes, I think for me, I really enjoyed the problem solving, but certainly for coming into that role, it was a vertical learning curve. I sort of can't sort of say that, lightly, because I literally had to learn payroll proper, so to speak. Because I had come from Big Four environment with expat payrolls, modified payrolls that were on spreadsheets, and then you'd often hand that work across to a compliance team that might do, the revenue reporting. But coming into an investment bank, not only did I need to learn the payroll, but also the banking system, the clearance and everything, that, the whole end-to-end piece really. And as stressful as that was and challenging and long hours, I absolutely loved it and thrived. And, for me as well, really enjoy being part of a team. Certainly in my roles and my career, there is no I in team. I have developed my career, my knowledge and my expertise by being part of those teams. And I have worked with some incredible people, incredibly experienced payroll professionals, whether they're more junior or senior, and I've learned from everybody.
Amazing, fantastic. And obviously 5 years later, you went on to win through the Global Payroll Association Expatriate Payroll Manager of the Year. So your passion sort of shone through and recognised, which must have been a really wonderful feeling. How was that when you won your first award? Was it expected, or tell me a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, not at all expected. Obviously you sort of see the different award ceremonies of the different industries, and it's fabulous to celebrate with friends and colleagues. And it was my role at Fitzgerald & Law. They were very keen on submissions to the various tax or payroll award associations. So no, it definitely wasn't expected, although there were several of us in the payroll team that had been put forward. So we did obviously know we were shortlisted.
Sure.
And we made that fantastic trip to Amsterdam. The wonderful award ceremony. And so for me, I'd never really put myself forward or had been put forward for an award. So when I was named as the winner, for me it did come as a complete surprise. And I think at that point you sort of look at yourself and go, oh well, that was me. And so you really enjoy and you're passionate about your work, but to actually be industry recognised and be able to share that with yourself
Sure.
and everybody else, then that for me was just an amazing experience. Well,
I know that I've known you now for over 15 years. You've always been very humble. You've always been very modest. But actually, if you go back to that time, for those not familiar with your background at Fitzgerald & Law, you were a director of international payroll. And even to this day, we're getting more payroll directors now coming through, which is great. More companies recognizing the importance of payroll with directorship titles. But back in 2016, you were one of only a very, very small handful of individuals in the whole of the UK that actually held a payroll director title, which I think is fantastic. And it helped gain recognition for others now who are following that same path. But if I was to come back to that, what's your view on the world of payroll, giving more titles at director level? Do you think this is a step that the industry needs to take? And what value can professionals give at that directorial level?
Yeah, 100%. I think gone are the days when people just made the assumption that payroll, you just press a button. Yeah. And I think as the world evolves and this is recognised, not just how important payroll is, but the complexity of payrolls, and with companies operating internationally and the way in which they pay people, or the compensation packages, how they're built and how that feeds into payroll, everything is more complex. And I think perhaps if years ago you had an accuracy threshold that was relatively low, then you wouldn't perhaps want the structure and hierarchy in a team. But more and more it's recognised how important it is to have an accurate payroll. And yes, not just in terms of paying people, but the external reporting requirements and the internal financial reporting, etc. So I think as that understanding and recognition becomes more important, and is sort of more of a focus for C-suite and for exec teams looking at that level of detail, I think it's a combination of factors that has supported the industry and has really brought payroll, to the table. So for people like myself, those opportunities come with that recognition. And also, I think for personalities like myself, when you want to actually, bang the drum for payroll, so I will forever support all the payroll teams that I work with. And I think it's a case of being in a position to champion that. So for those of us that have that voice and, sort of move into those positions, it's a real opportunity to explain to a business why the teams are important, why they do such an incredible job, and why we should be at the table.
Amazing. Well, you're now Senior Manager, Employment Expatriate Tax at ACIPP Group. So let's talk a little bit about how that relates to payroll and some of the work that you're doing now. So we've got things like global employment tax planning, managing compliance and regulatory requirements. How does all this relate to the world of payroll for those listening?
Yeah, so interesting for me, being a tax specialist that has progressed into a career in payroll. I find that I'm in a position where I can pivot around. Either I sit in the payroll team, I sit in the tax team, or perhaps I might sit in group legal or group reward. So what I can do is look at, so I understand the whole end to end. Someone's contract says, we are going to pay you this, or we're going to provide these benefits, or you're going to be entitled to these share awards. What I really enjoy and what I can bring to an organisation is, so did we do all of that? Did we do what we said we would do? And did we do everything accurately and correctly? So then I can follow the process through. And obviously really key to that is how payroll processes all that data, because it's how the data is fed in from the business, how the business interact and behave. So certainly at SSP Group, we do have a fantastic payroll manager, and for me it's a joy to work with her, because she's a very detailed person, as you would expect a payroll manager to be. To be able to support her and work with her, for me, I think together we can add real value to the global organisation.
There are a couple of sort of buzz terms that people may not be familiar with, but you're now going to be working with that payroll manager to discuss things like formal expat assignments or less formal arrangements and little things like that. For those perhaps not familiar, kind of give some definitions to some of the terms that might relate. I wonder if you could just expand on some of the things that you would communicate with your payroll manager, what some of those things mean for those that perhaps want to take this step but aren't quite there yet, or want to find out more.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, sort of when it's people and head count, I might categorise. So as we've come out of COVID, there'll be the definition of hybrid working. We're all familiar and we're all grappling with what policy or framework might look like on that. My next category is remote working. Particularly I can reference during COVID, where people have gone back home, wherever home is, usually overseas outside of the UK. And so currently I'm working on different scenarios where we still have people in those locations. And what does that mean for payroll? And moving on from the remote working, business travellers, and then a more formal agreement with individuals where the business and that person agree, you will remain on a UK contract, but we're going to give you an assignment letter on top of the employment contract, and we would like you to work overseas. So they're the different categories. That's what I put them in boxes. And so when I'm working with payroll, it will be, number one, what is a paying payroll? Who's going to process the numbers and actually deliver net pay to the individual? And secondly, what are the reporting requirements for tax? If I reference social security and as a global term, so the reporting requirements and the remittances to which location. So I will work with the payroll manager to start to identify who's responsible for each step of the work. And for me personally, really key is to understand the local payroll team, but also an overseas payroll team. And I aim to build a relationship with an overseas team that's equally as strong. Recognising language barriers, I'm very grateful for my overseas colleagues who do speak English. So I'm a tax specialist, I'm not a linguist, so I do rely on my overseas teams to understand. So often I have to simplify and break down terminology, probably just answering your question a little bit better.
Sure.
I try and break things down into more simple terms. And sometimes I won't use the word payroll. Sometimes I break it down and say bookkeeping, because by using that reference, I'm trying to explain the movement of numbers and reconciliation. And then I can translate into what that means onto which payroll.
That makes sense. Now, I think you've explained it really well there for me to get a better understanding. Hopefully, the payroll community is following just as easily, because I'm not someone who actually processes payroll, as we know, I recruit payroll experts. So it's still really kind of cementing in my mind. But something you mentioned there that really stuck out. So you've obviously been working in global payroll for many years. And you mentioned then it's really important that we understand when something is a paying payroll. I'm not quite sure what a paying payroll is. So I wonder if you could just explain that a little bit more detail for me. And also, I know you're also quite heavily involved in, or have been heavily involved in, shadow payroll. So for those, again, not familiar, if you could just determine what a paying payroll is and what a shadow payroll is, and why they're both very important to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, a paying payroll is a system that will identify net pay and push that net pay out into the individual and pay them into a bank account. That payment can technically be made anywhere in the world, from anywhere in the world. So any system can push out net pay and pay an individual, or it could be gross pay, depending on the circumstances.
Sure.
But there is a difference when there has to be revenue, tax authority or local revenue reporting, which to me is a really key part when I look at global payroll. Which location, what statutory legislation do we need to follow to submit the data from that payroll processing? So which location requires us to report its tax and or the social security calculation with the gross pay element included in there? And which tax authority requires a payment of those elements. So a shadow payroll can be like a secondary payroll that calculates all of those elements, but you might have a central payroll in a separate location that is responsible for running numbers and paying out the individual. So some people might be frowning at my explanation, but given my background in expatriate tax, when you're always going to have a home country and a host country,
sure,
the actual country that delivers the payroll might not be as you would expect, and I would say that's fine. It's the actual reporting to a tax authority and the remittance of those taxes that are key. So a shadow payroll is often that mechanism where we deal with the reporting and the payment of taxes, etc.
That makes a lot more sense to me. I can understand it now. So yeah, we make an assumption sometimes because we're a UK entity, for example, it's going to be the UK paying us, but it may not be, but you'd run the shadow payroll for the taxation and make sure that bit's correct. Just out of interest, I don't want to go into, I could be opening a big can of worms here, Kerry, so don't worry if you don't know the answer. But does this mean things like pay on demand solutions? Does that add a huge layer of complexity to things like that in your world of global payrolls, rather than just within one country? Because then you've got if you're paying on demand and you've got all these sort of shadow payroll tax considerations to consider as well, does that make it really complex? Is that something you're already involved in, or is it just not something you've had a chance to be exposed to yet?
So definitely been involved in discussions, so with CIPP and GPA, so definitely involved on feedback and discussions and listening. And I think certainly in industry sectors, it's sort of more popular than others. So SSP Group, we're not looking at pay on demand, but coming back to your question, for me, the complexity on that is the tracking and the reporting and understanding local legislation and when you're required to report a payment to an employee.
Yeah.
So I think those factors, for me, on looking at a global piece, make things very complicated. I made reference to a previous question about bookkeeping. So sometimes I try and break down the terminology from payroll, home and host, or shadow and paying, and I break it down to the bookkeeping and try and sort of reference the financials. So what are the numbers? What are we paying? Where is it balancing? And then translate that into what the payroll processing should be. And I feel that side of pay on demand, I do think it's coming, and I think it is the future, but I think it needs to be properly documented on how a company, how an organisation is going to manage that from all of that financial reporting, internal and external.
I suspect, Kerry, that I'm making definitely an assumption here. You must have a very good relationship with both finance and HR in the businesses you work with. Finance, because of your level of reporting, the data, and understanding that cost element. I mean, the financial departments must love you for that if you're based in finance. But HR as well, because of the employment side of what you're doing, making sure that people are paid correctly, that we're being adherent to the right laws and regulations. I don't know where you think payroll should sit, whether it should be on its own or whether it should sit under one of the other two. But I imagine in your role, which is slightly left field from conventional payroll now, you must have some fantastic relationships with finance and HR, would be my assumption.
Absolutely. And I think what really helps is I can kind of understand the language. And again, I come back to this sort of referencing the bookkeeping. So if I'm talking to finance, years ago when I was sort of studying for my tax exams, I had to do a bookkeeping course and I had to learn what's called T accounts. And you literally have your debit and your credit and everything must balance to nil. So I find that when we're looking at the payroll postings and those reconciliations, I refer back to that training 20 years ago.
Wow,
and
nice.
For finance, that's what they need. They need that reconciling down to nil on each account, irrespective of where the money has gone and where the numbers sit. So certainly for me, that interaction and the language that, sort of we speak in terms of those financials works really well.
Yeah. So we bring it back then to what you're doing at the minute. Again, not every operation will require an expatriate and employment tax specialist within their firm, which we understand depends on the nature of the business. But we are going more global now, particularly post-pandemic, with the idea of making hiring of employees much easier across borders, with remote working, the ability to connect now virtually. We're seeing an awful lot, certainly in recruitment terms, of businesses now opening up the regions from which they are open to recruiting from, rather than being with a local postcode. Now we can recruit from Germany or France or beyond, so which is really quite exciting. So for a business who is looking to expand, make changes, what would you bring to a business in terms of experience and knowledge in relation to global payroll from an employment tax perspective?
Certainly for me, it's interesting to understand the business case and the drivers. Where is the opportunity for the organisation? Do we already have an entity set up there with a payroll or not? And, sort of in the current climate, the sort of global expansion, quite often an organisation won't already be in location. And that then becomes more difficult because you can't just register a payroll. It isn't just pressing that button.
Sure.
It's complex. So, where I can sort of be part of a team and support on that global review is to understand what operation do you need in that location, what structure do we need. If we need a payroll, how do we implement it? Do we need to run our own payroll, or would we partner with a third-party organisation that can offer a service to us that can do that for us? And so what I mean by that is if you're not going to open an entity in a specific location, then we have the reference of a PEO, or I'd call an employer of record. So there are different ways in which an organisation can expand and move into a location and operate a payroll. But most companies will want to own and control and have their own entity, but it's not one size fits all. And there are different opportunities out there that you can sort of consider.
Have you ever asked yourself, how can I recruit payroll staff effectively? Please don't give up on your recruitment project just yet. Here at JGA Payroll Recruitment, we appreciate the difficulties associated with attracting, recruiting and retaining top payroll talent. We also understand just how costly a poor payroll hire can be. JGA Recruitment are a niche payroll recruitment agency who will partner with you to resource payroll candidates who will improve both the accuracy and efficiency of your payroll department. Contact us today on 01727 800 377 or visit jgarecruitment.com to find out more.
When you're dealing with these kind of considerations, you mentioned earlier about some of the relationships you might have with finance. Well, I think I brought it up, and it sounds like you've got a good relationship with finance. Who are the other kind of internal stakeholders that you would regularly be managing? And what are some of the challenges then? We've talked about the nice side of it. What are some of the challenges you have to face and overcome in terms of process and risk and things like that?
Certainly different stakeholders will have a view on what their role and responsibility is and what they own. And then you'll have different considerations on the confidentiality of the information they're working on and how much information that they might feel they need to share with other parts of the business. So certainly I can see that you might, with HR and the confidential information that HR are managing, then they might feel that the rest of the business don't need to see that information because HR own the people and are responsible for the contract. Sure. But group legal, for example, will be responsible for the legal structure of wherever that person might be working. And if it's a new location or it's a location that is being developed, the actual corporate structure and articles of association might not support the people agenda. So the whole interaction, and then obviously for finance, how are people being paid? And then we get into the world of when it's international and global payroll, transfer pricing and intercompany agreements. So you might have an employment contract and an international assignment sitting on top, that contract for an individual, but all these key legal and financial sort of implications are also very relevant.
So you often then got to sort of put little different hats on for different people. You're managing cross-departmental stakeholders all the time. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Kerry, but are there any recent examples or any projects where the implementation of payroll has been particularly challenging? And if they have been, are you able to expand on why perhaps it was challenging and maybe what you did to overcome some of the obstacles, if there are any examples you can think of?
Yeah. So actually, if I step back into my previous role at V Group or V-Ship, so they're a global ship management company. So my role, not only for land-based employees and sort of a global expatriates, also for seafarers working on ships, on vessels. And actually, so for example, if you're looking at an oil tanker that's based in location, even though it's offshore from the land, the ship becomes a permanent establishment, or it can do. So the location of work, and the crew could trigger the requirement to pay local income tax and social security that requires a local payroll. So certainly in my previous company, we would have ships working around the coast of Africa, and that company wouldn't have a corporate structure in Nigeria, for example. So how do you do it? And what is a commercial risk and what is a legal risk? What is a company prepared to accept? Either ignore the seafarers are on the ship, don't run the payroll. But to get the seafarer on the ship, they needed a visa to land in country and to be then moved across onto the ship. So the complexity of being in a location where you don't have that corporate structure, but you want to be morally and legally compliant on a payroll in a situation that is almost impossible. So those challenges are very real to me in that role. And that's where I would look at how you can partner with local companies. Do you look at a joint venture from a corporate structure, or do you then work with an organisation that can become the employer of record in that location? And then you're looking at risk. Who owns the individual? Who owns the payroll? Who funds the payroll? On the timing of the payroll. So sorry, I'm talking a lot. That gets quite complex.
It sounds complex, yeah.
But that's partly what I enjoy, is to look at that problem and to start with, think, gosh, that's impossible, and then step back and go, oh, hang on a moment, it might not be impossible. Who would we need to work with, and how would we need to look at that? And then start to put together the business case, and usually a board pay for the board of directors to then consider what that business case and proposal looks like, what the cost is, and what potentially the risks are in the different elements, as we've said.
I mean, it's a great example because, recently we've all suddenly become a little bit more aware of the complexities of seafarers, right, with the recent P&O situation. Yeah. So, these are things that perhaps many of us hadn't thought about either from an HR perspective, an employment rights perspective, on that particular example. But I wonder, and as an open question really, if you're a seafarer, do you think the seafarers are aware of the complexity behind the mechanisms that have to take place, the complexities, the challenges that the payroll departments within the firms they're working for are going through in order for them to get their pay slip at the end of the week, bi-weekly, monthly, whenever it is they're paid? Because obviously you don't want to take any assignment no one's going to take something if they don't think they're going to get paid correctly and on time. But do you think the seafarers are aware of some of those complexities and challenges that the payroll departments are faced with, or not? Do you manage to keep that separate?
I think it depends on the type of ship that somebody's working on. So if they're on international cargo, then they won't be aware of the local complexities. And when I mentioned earlier, as we're discussing, paying payroll can be, for that situation, the paying payroll can be almost anywhere. It can be a shared service centre. It might be in India, it might be in the Philippines. And so they're receiving usually gross wages. There might be some deductions for union fees, are quite common, but actually it will be seafarers that work on vessels that are involved in the oil and gas industry usually, and they will understand the complexity because they will usually be contacted by a tax authority. There will be registrations to do with how that ship works, and so certainly UK HMRC and there is a UK Mariners National Insurance Unit. They review.
I didn't know that. There you go. I've learned something today for sure. Okay.
And I didn't until I joined V Group. And that unit deals with this very specific legislation around the trigger for Class 1 employer national insurance liabilities for seafarers working on the UK continental shelf. That's a little bit garbled to sort of explain the background. But the reason I explain that is, and then the individual seafarers would claim back the income tax that we were deducting through payroll and paying to HMRC. That's, an age-old standard tax refund process. But this team reviewed the legislation and reviewed the tax refund claims, held the tax refund, and they said, but you're not paying Class 1 employee national insurance. And we'd had legal advice, and due to the circumstances of where they're employed and etc., and their nationality, they weren't required to pay Class 1 national insurance. So the problem then happened was HMRC and this national insurance unit went directly after the seafarer and not to us as the employer running the payroll. So to summarise on that was very stressful for all of the seafarers. And they talk.
So summarise, it was very, very stressful.
It was really hard. And I felt an emotional responsibility to try and take some of that stress from their shoulders and try and explain the legislation and try and push back on HMRC and have that correspondence. So just to give you that feel for seafarers that are placed in that position, whether it's UK, whether it's some of the EU ports and locations, there will be an awareness and they'll know it's really stressful because they feel that stress themselves and they feel that they have no control. And a lot of these nationalities are scared of their own local tax authorities because of the power the tax authority might have in their country. So then payroll, I feel, becomes absolutely key and really important to support and be able to demonstrate that we're doing the right thing and that we're doing it for the right reasons.
This may be something that actually I've just got the wrong end of the stick here, but I'm just trying to get an understanding from my side. For those that really au fait with how it works, it doesn't have to be seafarers. We're talking about people that are moving, maybe working from one region and another region, and you're kind of tracking them around from an expatriate tax perspective. Can it be more beneficial for some employees to receive, let's say they were due to get an annual bonus, so they may be better off being in associated with one location than another for when that bonus period is paid? And therefore, if they're up to speed with how this all works, is it possible they may contact you as the employee and say, actually, can we delay the payment of this until I'm here? Or I don't know. I'm just thinking about if they said somebody's really in tune with their taxation and how the different legislations work in different regions. Do you ever get that kickback from the employees? So in order for them to benefit, better their own situation, they might delay a payment or ask for something in a different currency or a different process.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can be a regular occurrence.
Okay.
And I'd say the pushback on the employee will depend on how experienced either someone like myself or the payroll manager will be. And I guess the strength of processes within the organisation. So the answer is no, the individual can't influence and plan the timing of a payment to put them in a position of tax advantageous position. So no, they don't have that control and they shouldn't have that control. But what I would say is there might be a situation where the overseas move, the overseas assignment is to a tax regime that has a lower rate of tax than perhaps the UK has. So if the starting point is the UK and the UK are the paying payroll, Hong Kong might be an example, where it's a lower tax rate. And when someone moves from the UK to Hong Kong, they will pay UK national insurance for 52 weeks, and then the UK national insurance liability stops. So you're no longer deducting that UK class 1 NIC from them, and they're in Hong Kong. So if the timing of the bonus, the time period they have earned that bonus coincides with the period they are working in Hong Kong, and there's no overlap in that time period for the UK, then they will be at an advantage. But that also depends on the contract they've signed to go and work in Hong Kong. Sure. So some companies will have called fully taxed equalised. So that will mean that they pay the tax and national insurance on that bonus wherever it's paid, whenever it's paid, during that assignment period. It will be equal to what they would have paid had they have sat in the UK all that time. That's to do with tax equalisation, what we call hypo tax. So that's how that would work. But if they're not on a tax equalised assignment and it's a different agreement they've reached with the company, then they might have an advantage. But I definitely wouldn't allow an employee to dictate.
I can imagine that causing a few complications. Yeah, for sure. But it didn't surprise me that you get those queries, if nothing else. I think it's been a wonderful tour into the world of complex payroll terms and jargon that maybe not everyone's familiar with. You just got into hypertax at the end there, which is a great way to continue through the conversation. On a, I guess, less complex note, shall we say, Kerry, where do you see the world of payroll moving then? The pandemic's had a huge impact on the profile of payroll. It's certainly had an impact on where, as we mentioned earlier, where people are based. The world of work has changed, which obviously directly influences your role in particular. Where do you see the world of payroll changing, and fast forward 2, maybe 5 years, how do you think the landscape will look?
So I think it's getting ever more complex. I think probably most people would agree, ever more complex. Nothing is simplifying. And the need to be on top of the legislation and the legislation changes is as important now as it ever was. So, and I think as companies look to expand, so the companies will look to diversify, expand, for all sorts of reasons, with the economy, with the challenges of, international trade. So for me, payroll is going to be key and so important going forwards for all the reasons we've discussed, the legal, financial, HR implications, to have a strong payroll team or a payroll relationship, whether it's in-house or working with external providers. I think to be a joined-up team is going to be more important and more valuable going forwards, and really key to the success of a global organisation. So that's certainly my view. So definitely, if anyone is looking for a career in payroll or to develop their career, it's the place to be. In my career, I always gravitate back into roles that are very closely aligned with payroll, and that's my passion overriding all the tax work that I do.
I love that. I think something that's really resonated with me, Kerry, and this isn't to take anything away from other guests I've had on the show or anything like that, but when we talk about the future of payroll, I would say 90%, maybe more, keeping it statistical here for payroll professionals, will say that the future is based on technology and how technology is going to advance the profession. But actually, the answer you've just given is much more focused on team, individual complexity, the ability for a payroll professional to be able to understand and comprehend that complexity themselves, legislation knowledge, dealing with tax and handling employees with the different, as you say, you get a lot of queries, but you've got to be able to have that HR arm to say, no, this is the way it's done. This is your contract of employment, this is how it relates. So I don't think you mentioned the word technology once throughout the whole episode, which for me is actually quite enlightening, because every time we talk about payroll now, we talk about automation, we talk about how tech's going to take over the world. What's your view on technology? Because for me, it's really lovely to hear that actually technology is no way going to replace the world of payroll. It can't, because of all the the real complex things you've given us today on today's show. So I'd love to get your take on where you see technology fitting in to the greater scheme of things.
Absolutely, technology is the way forward. I think I see technology as a supporting part of that bigger payroll overview. So I don't consider that technology will replace people. It will replace some of the more junior positions. But let's face it, we all have to come through as a junior to understand the nuts and bolts and progress. So that will still remain. Definitely, I saw a demonstration a couple of weeks ago of AI technology and how that technology can help run data analytics and the instructions that can be given to the robot, in effect, to build spreadsheets from standard data in a database. So definitely that's the future. And I think that sort of type of technology helps to remove a lot of the human error and the natural human error that comes with people managing databases.
Sure, 100%.
Yeah, and I think, as understanding of global technology and, again, working as teams on global payrolls, as that knowledge and support and working together develops, then I still feel, definitely technology is a way forward, but you still need those people. You still need that thought process, that, the brainstorming, the business plans, the processes, everything thought through. So I don't feel that technology replaces, it enhances and supports in the right places.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. It supports the expertise that people like yourself and the people you've worked with have gained over many years to leverage the best use of that tech, I guess. But the idea of a system running a global payroll single-handedly without any payroll expertise behind it would probably horrify you slightly.
It would me personally. I'm quite sure, as you mentioned, that will exist, that there will be companies that have that view and that's their vision, and they will work towards and implement that. And I feel that until that technology is implemented and it's tried and tested, and maybe year one, everything is fine, everyone's happy, but it might be year two that you've got some non-standard complexities that no human thought about, so it wasn't built into the process, that things can fall over. So I'm not convinced yet that we're in a place where technology can run the whole end-to-end process. And I hope that it doesn't. I hope that we've got a journey to learn together before we get there.
I mean, I think if nothing else, Kerry, your career shows everyone who's listening to this just, how far people can go in payroll. You've had a fantastic career that I'm sure one that you must be very, very proud of. It's a real achievement. So I want to encourage everyone who's listening to this to go, you can go take your career in any direction in payroll. It doesn't have to be just to payroll management and there's a ceiling. You can move into technology and implementation, but equally you can move into tax and expatriates and global and all these different things. So it's never been more exciting in terms of a pathway-led profession, I think, than it is right now. I think that's really, really exciting. And thank you so much for giving us a bit of a whistle-top tour of global tax and mobility. We're going to open the vault, Kerry. Some quick, short questions with some short, sharp answers.
Entering the vault.
One piece of advice you would give to someone working in payroll right now?
Always look up, never look down, but also have compassion for your colleagues.
Yeah, fantastic. If you had the power of foresight and you could change the entire payroll industry with one action or one improvement, what would that action or improvement be?
Better teamwork. I don't know. It's a difficult one for me to answer, but that's why I need Kate Upcraft to help me out.
Well, Kate's been on the show twice now, bless her. So maybe we should combine the two and have another show. Last but not least, I know that we've had a few dances along the years, Kerry, at these different events. But if payroll were a song, what song would it be and why?
Shine by Take That.
There you go. Knocked it out the park. Oh, excellent.
Absolutely. Shine with your celebration arms, because I just think that payroll should be celebrated, and every payroll professional should shine and be proud of themselves in the profession, in their industry.
Love that. What a great way to finish the show. Kerry Hudson, thank you so much for joining me today on the Payroll Podcast. Of course, if people want to find out more and connect with you, happy for me to share your LinkedIn profile in the show notes?
Absolutely. Very happy to talk to anyone that wants to chat.
Excellent. So I'll make sure that's there. So if anyone has that burning expatriate tax question, you need to find out more, or you want to discover, how the kind of the decisions that Kerry's made in her career to get where she has, then I'll put that LinkedIn URL in the show notes to check through. And of course, if you are a payroll leader listening to this show and you need support with a particular payroll vacancy anywhere in the globe, it doesn't have to be in the UK, then we can support you here at JGA Recruitment Group. Just go to www.jgarecruitment.com, and my contact details will also be in the show notes if you want to reach out to me directly. Just leaves me to say thank you again, Kerry Hudson, for joining me today on the show. I look forward to bringing the next episode of the Payroll Podcast real soon. Thank you, Kerry.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you for having me. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Payroll Podcast with Nick Day of JGA Recruitment. If you need help with a current payroll vacancy, then please get in touch with Nick and his team. All contact details can be found in the episode notes. In the meantime, to make sure you never miss a future episode, please subscribe to the show through any of your favorite podcast channels. Till next time.